If you've already seen parts 1 through 5 of this 6-part series of videos, please fast forward for the new material while I review. The entire series gives evidence that contradicts the claim on the Oxford.com website that there is no connection between the life of Edward de Vere and the works of Shakespeare. These videos take the form of a trial to ascertain who is guilty of the crime of writing the works of Shakespeare. In this investigation, the approach is simple. The plays and poems constitute a crime scene. We must examine the crime scene to help generate profiles of two suspects. I'll be following a special procedure, one in which much of the evidence for the Oxfordian case will rely on hostile witnesses, Stratfordian scholars, i.e. those who believe the author is William Shakespeare from Stratford. For those of you wondering why I pronounce the name as Shakespeare, it's because I'm using the spelling on his baptism entry. In his personal life, the man from Stratford never spelled his name with an E after the letter K. This slide shows the 7 categories I will examine, and this video covers Shakespeare's language and accolades and the Shakespeare dedicatees. In each video I address what do Stratfordian scholars say about the writer Shakespeare? How does William of Stratford connect to these people and events? What connections exist between Oxford, that's Edward de Vere, and these people and events? Let's look at language and accolades. Word creation. I'll make this brief and put Shakespeare and Oxford together on one slide with one example of one word creation. There are so many. Please pause to read in detail. There is an enormous number of contemporary accolades to Shakespeare the author, but not one of them is personal. This is a critical point. Every reference is of an impersonal nature, such as a review or literary criticism. Not one commentator refers to him in a way that indicates knowledge of him as a human being. And I'll let you pause to read this slide. Literary accolades connected to Shakespeare. As I pointed out in the Constructing Fantasies section of this site, oxfordfraud.com, Shakespeare is the only presumed author since the invention of the printing press for whom all the evidence of authorship is posthumous. No unambiguous primary source evidence of William Shakespeare from Stratford-on-Avon being a poet-playwright exists. Full stop. Literary accolades connection to Shakespeare continued here. Dinah Price is the author of Shakespeare's unorthodox biography, and she made a list of 24 contemporaries for whom we have evidence they were indeed authors. This is a list of Dinah Price's Elizabethan literary paper trails. So, in other words, to be acknowledged as a writer in the Elizabethan period, there would be evidence in at least one of these categories. You can pause the video to go over them in some detail. Across the top of this slide are the 10 literary paper trails that show from 3 to 10 check marks for 24 poet-playwrights and none for Shakespeare. Is this proof that Shakespeare wasn't the author? No, but I'm not looking for proof. I'm making a case for one argument being stronger than another. This slide shows what happens if you take the number of check marks for each of the authors and turn them into data. 24 data points, 10 refers to 10 check marks, that's for Ben Jonson, and the final 3 to Christopher Marlowe, and the other 24 authors are in between. The statistical results are in red. The probability of an author not having documentation in at least one category is 0.3%, or the probability of an author having documentation in at least one category is 99.69%. Literary accolades for Oxford. There are so many of them. I have picked just one here. Again, pause this video so you can read it in detail. I'll go to the bottom. I may not omit the deserved commendations of many honourable and noble lords and gentlemen, among whom the Right Honourable Earl of Oxford may challenge to himself the title of most excellent among the rest. And finally, the Shakespeare dedicatees. There are 3 dedicatees in all the works bearing the name William Shakespeare. They are Henry Risley, to whom the first 2 works bearing the name Shakespeare appear, the poems Venus and Adonis and The Rape of Lucrece, and William and Philip Herbert, to whom the 1623 first folio of the collected works of Shakespeare was dedicated. Connection to Shakespeare: Henry Risley, Earl of Southampton. This Stratfordian admits in his book, "We have no evidence as to when, where, or under what circumstances William Shakespeare first met the Earl of Southampton. We have only conjectures." And do note here that when he says William Shakespeare, as with all the other biographers, they are making the assumption that William Shakespeare was William Shakespeare from Stratford. Same thing with Samuel Schoenbaum. Admits in A Compact Documentary Life, even though William willed items to his fellows Hemmings, Burbage and Condell, he strangely neglects to mention Southampton. Is there a connection between the Earl of Southampton and Oxford? Lord Burleigh sought a marriage between Southampton and Oxford's daughter Elizabeth Vere at the time Venus and Adonis was published, dedicated to Southampton, as I've said. Some Stratfordians believe that the marriage sonnets were written at this time. Let's go on to William Herbert, Earl of Pembroke. Connection to Shakespeare: no known connection. Pembroke never mentions William, nor does William ever mention Pembroke. Is there a connection between William Herbert and Oxford? Well, Pembroke was at one time in negotiations with Burleigh to marry Oxford's daughter, Bridget Vere. Let's go to the last dedicatee, Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery. Connection to Shakespeare: no known connection. Montgomery never mentions William, nor does William ever mention Montgomery. Connection between Philip Herbert, Earl of Montgomery, and Oxford: Philip Herbert married Oxford's daughter, Susan Vere. Scholars often speculate how the unpublished plays in the first folio got into the hands of the publishers. It is reasonable to think that if the author's daughter were married to someone associated with the first folio, that would be a likely means of transmittal. Susan Vere is the likely conduit for the transfer of the Shakespeare manuscripts to Montgomery and hence to the publishers. Do I know that for a fact? No, I do not. But there certainly is no indication that Shakespeare from Stratford had any of those kinds of connections. I leave it to the viewer to decide the candidate for whom the evidence is stronger. And I repeat, I am not talking about proof. No proof exists for either candidate. Credit for the major part of this video series goes to Mark Alexander from whose PowerPoint presentation I borrowed heavily. Thank you, Mark.